Good morning. And for our dear friend from Armenia, Bari Aravot, I hope you understand me and I pronounced it correctly. It is a great pleasure for me to stand here in front of you and give you a quick overview of the road that we have traveled since 1994, when this country started to rebuild itself, up to today, especially in the justice sector and in the realm of case management. I am not a historian by trade, but I will try as much as I can to retrace what we went through, because I was involved in the justice sector for more than 16 years, from 1999 to in the late 2015, and in different capacities, by the way. I studied with the prosecution. I went and worked with a development partner, helping the justice sector as a whole, and eventually I was hired to be part of the first team in the Justice Sector Coordination Secretariat, which is the capacity in which I left when my time came to go and do other things. I happen to have been the project manager who was in charge of implementing the ICMS from 2013 at its beginning, from its inception to the moment it became almost operational. So it is therefore a great pleasure for me to share with you our road. I'll ask those who are working over there to move on with the next slide. So my presentation has been summarized in 4 big periods in the history of this country in terms of case management. You will see the first period goes from 94 to 1995, the very first 2 years after the terrible tragedy that this country had encountered, the genocide against the Tutsis. And then from 96 to 2002, the first period, I called it the immediate aftermath of the 94 genocide. And then the 96 to 2002, that's a period of rebuilding of the justice system. 2003 to 2008, there are like 3 big things that happened in the justice sector, as much as I could remember. There was the Gacaca process, the Gacaca transitional justice system, which was being implemented. It went into operation in that period. There was also the judicial reform, the legal and judicial reform. For those who were there, you can remember the commission that we used to call Commission Karugarama back then, before he became the Minister of Justice. And then there was also the adoption of a sector-wide approach, partly because of the pressure that we received from the international community to adopt some best practices in developing different sectors in the country. And then finally, the real march towards a full digital integration of the justice sector, which started in 2009. So, and then I will touch a little bit what I think we have to look at as we go forward in this journey. So 1994, the immediate aftermath of the 94 genocide against the Tutsis. Move on. There's no need to go into the depth of the wars that this country went through in since 1990 to 1994. All of us are very much aware of what were the aftermath. What I can say is that the justice sector was severely devastated. On one hand, we had a huge caseload of genocide, which we had inherited, with more than 100,000 people who were in detention. More than 100,000. I remember in some report they used to say 120,000. But to be conservative, I said more than 100,000 in preventive detention. The justice personnel, most had fled the country, those who were still alive after 94, because they had participated or they were suspected of participating into the genocide. And some of those were killed because of being Tutsis or being sympathizers with the Tutsis people. So we inherited a situation, even in terms of personnel, the justice sector was poorly equipped. Very, very few people were there to take care of the huge caseload. No, go back. And the infrastructure, of course, the buildings that existed to host the courts, to host the prosecution offices, were destroyed. This is something that many people will recollect who were there then. and move on. As a consequence, it was almost an impossible situation to imagine. IT penetration in that period in the country was quasi-inexistent. We had an existential problem of creating, first of all, security in the country, stabilizing the institutions. Although there was a clear vision from the government of moving towards modernity, therefore adopting anything that's technology that could help us grow and develop as a developing country, it wasn't the first priority then. People had to eat, they needed to sleep somewhere, and we needed to ensure that there is peace, a minimum of peace and security everywhere. So during that period, case management was everything was manual. Any person who was arrested, the police communal back then used to take papers and pens. Everything was written with paper and pen. Transmission of files required photocopying and physically moving towards the place where the file had to be transmitted. So case management was at the level 0 of beginning. It's understood that in my subject, I'm dealing with case management in the justice sector specifically. I'm not talking about other sectors. Now, the period that followed, from 96 to 2002, we started rebuilding the justice system. This is the period where there was, because we couldn't wait for people to go to university and spend 3, 4, 5 years doing legal studies before they become fully qualified. There was a lot of people who were trained to become paralegals. I remember, I think the Secretary General in the Public Prosecution Authority was actually heading one of the associations that was doing this kind of work. I'm not sure, but I think he was involved in this thing, training of paralegals, and then the very few fresh graduates from the National University of Rwanda, when it was still National University of Rwanda, they came into the system very quickly. They were absorbed and they brought some relief, although it wasn't, they were still overpowered by the huge caseload. This is the same period where some of the justice sector infrastructure buildings were being rebuilt, and I think in '99 that's when the new Prosecutor General's office was commissioned. And 1999, that's when I was officially, I entered into the justice sector. I remember we entered into a brand new building, still smelling fresh paint, and it was interesting because I think in the ale, in one of the ales on my floor, there was Avocat General Johnston Busingye, who is now Honorable Minister of Justice. In front of me, there was some people who are now have gone to become justices in the Supreme Court, and I was in charge of dealing with the IT department back then in the prosecution. So in June 2002, the Gacaca jurisdictions were launched officially, although they were the law itself that was passed for the Gacaca, that happened in 1998. There was a preliminary period of preparing what was required from 98 to 2002, the judges and the proceedings and the forms they would use to collect information. I have to say that's the time I was also appointed to become a judge in the Gacaca jurisdiction in my own locality. In that period, IT penetration was still very low in the sense that in different institutions there was not everybody had a computer, for example. It was gradually penetrating, but it was still very low. In the judiciary, the only thing that looked like case management, they were managing their information in Microsoft Excel files. We may laugh of it today, but that was the case then. And Access database files. In the Prosecutor General's office, we had a special imperative. I remember there was the Gacaca law of 1998 in one of its articles, Article 51, I remember, had given to the prosecution the duty of preparing information that had to be given to all Gacaca jurisdictions in their specific cells. So that was quite a nightmare to imagine. And there was not a lot of IT people, so the little team that was in the Prosecutor General's office then went on and built the first genocide database, a database including all genocide cases in a summarized form. And it was built on Microsoft SQL 2000 for those who are tech savvy, which is an old technology today, completely superseded. And it supported the Gacaca jurisdictions. We were able actually to produce the information that all the jurisdictions up to the level of cell and print it, because there was no internet. Forget about internet penetration. I think we're just at the beginning of the mobile phones in the 2002 there. Not everybody had a mobile phone. Penetration must have been around 25% of the people then. So in other institutions, everything was on Excel and Word, simply. Basically, no case management, no electronic case management as we understand it in the modern sense today. So in summary, I can say that case management was still manual, but to a growing extent, the information that went in those cases was captured using computers to some extent. Not everywhere, because in the lower jurisdictions, in the lower courts, for example, they still use pen and paper. Same thing in the prosecution, same thing in the police. The issue was even aggravated by the fact that it's a bigger institution. It was bigger in terms of presence through its police stations everywhere. So there was no network linking these people. They have to actually move physically, take photocopies of the document and move with them where they had to go. So if we move on, the next era, or the third period I would say, is covers from 2003 to 2008, where we had a judicial reform. You remember, you'll recollect that there was a commission that was established for the, a constitutional commission that was headed by, back then, Chief Justice Mutsinzi. He wasn't Chief Justice at that time, but he was the head, the president of the Constitution Commission. And there was another commission dealing with legal and judicial review, or revision, that's which was headed by former Honorable Minister Tarsis Karugarama. And that's the period of reform and adoption of a sector-wide approach. It was a time of transformation in the sense that even from the Ministry of Finance, there was an impetus. They were asking all sectors to work as communities and try to solve their problems together, because whatever happens in one institution in the same community of activities affects the other institutions, and therefore it was important, given the limited resources, to approach the solution of all these problems and challenges they had as a group, in a sector-wide approach. So the Gacaca jurisdictions went into full operation in June 2002, and they were supported by the National Public Prosecution Authority and Rwanda Correctional Service. Directly, I don't want to go into too many details, because when we talk of Gacaca, it started as a sixth chamber in the Supreme Court, and then it was separated as a separate secretariat. For those who were there, they can remember. And then from then, the classical justice system, the courts, was sort of relieved of the issue of dealing with those, to some extent, of the genocide cases. Those cases were sent to Gacaca, and they did not have an imperative by law, legal imperative to help the Gacaca jurisdictions. It was not part of their prerogative in the judiciary per se, but the prosecution had an important role to play, because it had to produce evidence as much as possible that was collected in the existing document. You'll excuse me, that's my computer making noise. Then there was a constitutional reform in 2003. We had a new constitution then, quickly followed by the legal and judicial reform, which really changed the landscape of the justice system. I don't want to go into those details because it's a bit irrelevant for me. Both resulted in a profound transformation of the justice system. And then at the same time, almost in 2006, we created for the first time the Justice, Reconciliation, Law and Order sector, which was collecting, I think, approximately 12 institutions back then, with the Ministry of Justice, the judiciary, of course. We had the prosecution, the police, the Rwanda Bar, the Rwanda Bar Association, National Unity and Reconciliation Commission, and many other institutions. I'm sorry for those that I didn't mention, but it was one of the most important sectors in the country. There were other sectors: education sector, health sector, economy sector, but we had to come up with an approach to deal with all the challenges that the justice sector was facing. As that sector was created, it resulted in 2007 into the creation of an ICT thematic working group. For the first time, we said, let's look at all the problems, the technological problems that we have. How can we harness information technology for this sector in an efficient manner to serve the sector as best as we can? So that raised a great awareness in terms of the needs of integrating our services. The ICT landscape back then, we could say that there was a solid penetration of ITs, of information technology, ICTs, information and communication technologies. The usage of computers was widely extended to most of the justice sector institutions, with very few exceptions. I think the police was one of those exceptions, the national police, because of their size, we didn't have the budget to cover every single post of the police. It wasn't possible simply because of limitations. A few legacy systems started being built in that period. In the judiciary, they adopted a system, I think, from a Canadian organization that was called Registre des Dossiers Judiciaires, which is a registry of judicial cases, if you want, in English. By 2004, they had it. In the Public Prosecution Authority, they created a criminal records system. They actually built that system in 2007, in August, and I think it's still the one running today, dealing with the registration of all criminal history when people are condemned and it goes into the criminal record. And in the Ministry of Justice and the police, they were still using Excel files. They were still there to record all case information. In summary, for this period, from 2003 to 2008, case management was still carried out manually, even if there was a greater use of computers. There was a lot of manual processing, even if computers were there. However, thanks to a greater internet access, a lot of the information now was being transmitted electronically to make it efficient, to make it faster, even though physical transmission was still mandatory. In other words, when a person in institution A had to send something in institution B, they could have sent the scanned copy of the document immediately for reasons of efficiency, but eventually the physical document had to be photocopied and taken. At least the original and the copy stays there, and it had to be taken to point B. So that was the issue. The final period, which I consider the real march towards a full digital integration of the justice sector, happened starting from 2009 up to today. We are still doing that. We are not yet done. There's a lot to be done. There's still a going forward, and I'm going to talk of that towards the end. So, in June 2009, specifically in that period, through its ICT thematic working group, the group I talked about a while ago, the justice sector published for the first time an information strategy that would cover 3 years, from almost 3 years, yes, from 2009 to 2012. And that document for the first time specified, it articulated in that article, in that activity 3.2 of the document. That's the document. In fact, if you could zoom a bit, I gave a snapshot of the document. I think it says exactly this. 3.2, implement a unified electronic case management system for all institutions involved in the judicial process. This was the very first time a statement was officially accepted in an official document in the sector, in which we expressed the necessity of having an integrated electronic case management system shared by all institutions. There's a little bit more description about what it was supposed to be doing, but for those who are interested, they can get the document. So move on. Now, adoption of the ECMS, of the electronic case management system idea, that was met with some measure of resistance for very many legitimate reasons. Now, I think this is the section where those who are sleeping must wake up. Seriously, because if in your country you haven't yet adopted an ECMS, you'd better listen clearly here. The greatest impediment to implementing an ECMS is not technology. The greatest obstacle to implement an electronic case management system covering a full sector is definitely not technology, especially today. Maybe then it was more so, but now absolutely not. The greatest obstacle is people, mindset. That's what is very important to understand. If there is not a clear support from the highest level of the leadership of your sector for a unified electronic case management system, you are bound to fail. You cannot succeed. You'll see there's a small sad smiley at the end because I have experienced that. I went through that process. I traveled that way. There was a lot of resistance, although it was received in an official document. But maybe this is the moment to quote Bernard Shaw. I was reading that a few minutes ago. There are people who see things as they are and they ask why. And there are people who dream of things that haven't yet been and they say, why not? The goal of this conference is to change all of us into that second category. If you haven't yet gone into that second category, this is the moment to think seriously. ECMS was only possible because we had a critical mass of people that came to the point where they dreamed of something and they said, why not? If we were of the group that said, why? Why? We're okay, it's still functioning the way it is, we would have never moved toward the ECMS. So those who were resisting were talking about the lack of a clear implementation timeline. ECMS was just an idea. However clear it was, we couldn't establish an implementation timeline because there was not yet a budget for it. So second issue was, where's the dedicated budget for building such a huge system as it was perceived then? The fear of the unknown. Reticence to jeopardize the independence of the judiciary. I'm not accusing the judiciary, but there was legitimate, all of these are legitimate reasons, by the way. I'm not saying that they are not justified. Of saying, are we going to lose our independence if we mix our data with other institutions? And the independence of the judiciary is a sacrosanct, it's a holy principle in the justice sector. You don't play with that. Okay, I hope I said it properly for all those who are in the judiciary here. Now, the fear of increased cybersecurity threats. Because by putting everything in one system, people raise legitimate concern. What if that system fails? We all fail all of a sudden. It sort of became a single point of failure. All those ideas were brought to us. By end 2009, the judiciary acquired the electronic record management system. We have to say that its procurement had started in 2008, late 2008, October 2008, which was something that did a little bit what the ECMS was supposed to be doing, but not really a case management system. It was more of a document management system, as the name says. And then by 2011, the judiciary developed an electronic filing system to help citizens submit online documents in a specific case. And then both the ERMS, the Electronic Record Management System, built in 2009, and the EFS, Electronic Filing System, were not integrated between themselves. And that's in the same institution. They were not talking to each other. Transfer of information from EFS to ERMS had to be done manually by the IT staff. So in other JALOS institutions, when I'm saying this, I'm not saying this as a negative way, because the judiciary actually was showing a sense of a desire to innovate, to move forward. compared to other institutions. In other jailhouse institutions, such as in the correctional service and in the prosecution, they had standalone document management systems. Now, you understand that all these systems become legacy systems, and they become an object for resisting to adopt a common system. Because we've invested into something. Why should we move from here to something else? Now, if in your country, and I'm talking now to those who don't have an ECMS, please, if you can reduce to the minimum the separate systems development and think of a wider unifying system. If you don't have the legacy systems, you are blessed. That's the right moment to go for ECMS. Don't go into individual institutions development, because that's a loss of money eventually. You'll realize it was useless to go there. So anyway, no integration existed between all these systems. There was absolutely, they didn't talk to each other. They sort of served a little bit the purpose for which they were built, but they did not give the full satisfaction. You'd better have a bike than have a Rolls Royce, isn't it? If you can't have a Rolls Royce, you can accept a bike, isn't it? That's what I want to say. So they had a bike, and the Rolls Royce seemed too difficult to attain, and that's the ECMS. Now, people had a problem releasing the bike because they weren't sure to find the money to get the Rolls Royce. So, no integration existed. Duplicate information records were kept about the same cases. I start my case in the police. Well, in the police they get, this is telling me that my time is almost over. So, but we are going very fast, no. So, I start the case in the police, I give all my information. I move on to the prosecution. They ask me the same information. I got into the court, they asked me the same information. So we had 3 databases at least. And by the time I move on into the prison, if I'm convicted, again they capture my information. So multiplicity of databases capturing the same information, a lot of duplication. The system encompassed only a portion of the operational business processes they should have covered. They did not do everything as one would wish to do, to have it. They just did a bit of what they should have been doing as a full case management system. So by end 2012, as a project manager and ICT advisor for the justice sector, my hopes were very low. And I'm saying that the future looked bleak for the IECMS. We'd been advocating with other people about the IECMS. But if you don't have the budget, if you cannot talk of a clear timeline when this will start and end, it's very difficult to convince other actors within the same sector that please don't move on with that system, because there is this new system which is going to help us. Now move on, next one. Now the 24th of May 2013 for me is a turning point, because there was a change of leadership in the Ministry of Justice. Now I'm not saying this like a sycophant or someone who tries to please the current Minister of Justice. That's when Honorable Minister Johnson Busingye came into the Ministry of Justice with a new mindset and a huge impetus, because he quickly grasped the idea of the IECMS and became a strong champion. If in your country the highest authority in the justice ministry is not buying into this idea, don't bother. You will not succeed. Because this is the person that went and advocated and spoke to the rest of the leadership group, that is the heads of all the institutions within the justice sector. Although we spoke, my voice wasn't as big as his. His was much bigger than mine. So by September 2013, we gained the full support of the leadership group, the number ones of all the justice sector institutions. That was like a breath of fresh air for me. As project manager, we moved on into building the architecture of that system. From August 2013 to May 2014, with the collaboration of RDB and a vendor, an enterprise architecture specialized vendor called Notion Limited from South Africa, and we built the IECMS solution architecture. We actually went into every institution and described all the business processes and all the data and everything that was supposed to be part of it. This was highly technical work. By September 2014, we started the procurement of the IECMS process or project. By November 2000, on the 27th of December 2014, I met with Mr. Maybe 1 or 2 days before that, with Mr. Ashwath Ovanesian of Synergy International System, because Synergy International Systems was selected as the company to develop the IECMS. And I think we met, and in the span of 1 week, we had come to agree and negotiated the contract, and before the end of the year, we had signed a contract for the development of the IECMS. In November, of course, development started then. By November 2015, a working first version of the IECMS was ready. I remember sitting in a meeting on the 15th of December with the Minister of Justice and many actors in the justice sector when they announced that starting from January 2016, the IECMS was to become operational. And it did. It became operational. The rest, as we say, is history. It is a history of software updates and, capacity building. Now, in summary, during this period, the 10 years, 2009 to 2019, what has happened? We really embarked on true electronic case management. It became a reality in January 2016. Because all institutions involved in the chain of providing justice were linked to the system now. They are linked. It's a reality. Information started being seamlessly transmitted between all parties involved in a case. We don't need to leave, I don't need to leave my police post for me to send a case into prosecution. It goes. As soon as I click the button, the prosecutor gets it, and they have it on their table, and they work on it. And the prosecutor finishes their work, and it goes to the judiciary, to the proper judiciary office, and so on. So, duplications of record is eliminated. We all share the same data. When a person is recorded, if someone improves that information, everybody benefits from that. The IECMS revolutionized the way justice is carried out in Rwanda. Now, I'm very passionate about this, sorry. Give me 1 more minute. In March 2016, the Rwandan judiciary won a gold award from the African Association for Public Administration and Management. I wasn't in the justice sector by then, but I slept on my 2 ears feeling happy because I felt I played a little role into that. Not a big one necessarily, but a little one. In 2017, the same system received another accolade. It was among the top 10 court technology solutions that received an award from the US National Association for Court Management in Washington, D.C. This is quite good. I thought that was the moment you clap your hands. Now, going forward, I mean, the very fact that we have this kind of conference is telling me that Rwanda has become some kind of a beacon to inspire other African nations. Even, why not, world nations. I remember talking to the leadership group, standing just as I stand today, speaking passionately about the system which was in my dreams. And the Chief Justice, that's why he mentioned my name, he said, "You're really passionate about this." So he thought I was going, I hope, please don't take offense. We were neighbors, and he has my utmost respect. We were neighbors where we lived some times back. So going forward, the justice sector needs to improve the IECMS performance. I'm hearing from users that there are issues with performance and maybe reliability. Sometimes it's down, sometimes it's up. But we need to work on that. That's normal with any system. You hit glitches, but 99% of the time it's up and running. So we cannot say it's wrong because of the 1%. We need to address ever-growing cybersecurity threats because every time new systems are implemented, cybersecurity threats also grow. They can come in. We need to introduce real-time big data analytics. Big data analytics. Let me not elaborate on that. We'll talk of this in the plenary. We'll need to implement further integration with other external data sources. Let me not mention that, but the preceding presentation we had did mention that there exists other registries. If we connect with them, if the IECMS is integrated with these, we can actually enrich the information we get about defendants in criminal cases or parties in civil cases. We need to improve more automation for all repetitive processes. That's where machine learning, that's where artificial intelligence can be put in when something is quite repetitive and a certain set of criteria needs to be looked at, you don't need to always have a human intervention for the next process to happen. This could be done by the machine itself. So automation is very important. I think that's all, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you.